Shalom, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the channel. There are many talk at the moment within the body of Messiah, within churchianity, within Christianity, and even within the awakening that a rapture is imminently approaching, a rapture for the body of Messiah. And these are things that people are expecting and preparing for. And we need to have understanding of this doctrine and what it means and how we can make sure that we are correctly and rightly dividing the word of truth so that we are not deceived. So I want to spend some time looking at some of these things that have been covered before, but want to make it a bit more concise in a shorter format, and also include the links for some teachings of this previous doctrine where we can see how Hasatan has used it and the doctrines of men to try to confuse people in the body by giving them the wrong understanding, the wrong timing, the wrong event, and of course the wrong people. And all of those things lead to error. So we're going to get into some things in a bit more detail, but in a concise format. And if Yah is willing, we will do a follow-up live stream where we'll discuss some of the other events that we should be looking out for with correct understanding in the near future. But for now, let's dive into this rapture teaching and make sure we understand the things the Most High has got for us. This is a doctrine that has been in Christianity and religion for many a year and has gained a lot of traction specifically this year for some reasons that we will look at in a moment. And so there are people within the body of Messiah in the awakening who are asking questions about this and why has it gained so much traction recently, and is there any truth in it? And many things have been happening which will make some people question whether or not this doctrine be true. Now, I have previously talked about the pre-tribulation rapture versus the second Exodus, and this is something that I'm going to leave a link in the description, a video I recorded just over 3 years ago, going through how there are many deceptions that we have to be aware of, and there are many counterfeits that have been put in place to make one doctrine seem like the other. But by rightly dividing, we can always get to the correct exegesis of the word to make sure that we're not deceived, and we are following exegesis rather than eisegesis, where you work your own interpretations into the scriptures and come out with your own conclusion, something that we are of course forbidden to do. And so we need to let the scriptures interpret the scriptures. And by doing this, we are able to easily identify and rightly divide the things that are on the horizon and not therefore be looking out for the wrong things. So I want to spend some time today going through a few scriptures just so we can get ourselves some clarity. So as we look at this particular doctrine, as I mentioned, this video you see on screen titled "Are you ready for the second Exodus, or are you waiting for the pre-tribulation rapture?" was recorded about 3 years ago and goes into some detail about the second Exodus doctrine, where the Most High will gather his people, his true people from Yasharal, just as he did for the first Exodus, and how this doctrine has been replaced somewhat in churchianity or Christianity with the rapture doctrine, and how they say that the Exodus, or the first Exodus, which we know is fulfilled in the scriptures, was then repeated in the second Exodus, which has already been fulfilled according to religion and Christianity, and this was done in 1948. They claim in the political state that they call Israel. So this teaching goes through the pitfalls of the doctrine of the rapture and misunderstanding it or allowing it to be misinterpreted. And so this video you see on your screen goes through a comprehensive teaching of the doctrine of what is the second Exodus and how we have to be aware and not be confused by what they class as a pre-tribulation rapture, which is taken out of the way before any trouble, major trouble, takes place. And so the link will be in the description, and I would encourage you to watch it. Now, many of the doctrine that is forming this rapture talk for this particular season has come from an interview of a gentleman who I will put on screen now, where this gentleman claims to have had visions that were given to him by the Most High, and being told that this rapture will happen in 2025 in the Feast of Trumpets, which he believes, and many of those in the political state believe, will be on the 23rd or 24th of September 2025. And this video has gone viral, and many other people who are so-called watchmen in the community have been cutting and pasting clips of this video with their own videos. And so therefore it's gone viral, it's got a lot of traction, and it's got a lot of people talking and believing that this prophecy is going to come to pass, speaking specifically of this rapture happening in September of 2025, namely at the Feast of Trumpets. And so if you search out for this video, you can see the full interview for yourself. Now, I won't cast any judgment on the particular individual who's been interviewed and those interviewing him, because I will save that potentially for a live stream that, Yah willing, we will do in the next week or so, where we may go into some more detail using this video as a basis. But for now, I will just leave it on the screen. If you want to search it out and listen to it for yourself, then obviously you can do that. And one of the things that I will say is that this gentleman is from South Africa, and so are the people that are interviewing him. And many people believe that South Africa is the land of the true Yasharal, which, personally speaking, I don't have revelation on, but what I do know is that it will play some significance in these end times, even whether it be as a place where the Most High uses to gather his people before taking them into the wilderness, but it will play some significant part. And so again, because this gentleman and the people interviewing him are from that land, it has gained more traction within the body of Messiah and those in the awakening, because they believe that, or those that believe that it's the land, are saying, well, could this person actually be correct in what he's saying, because he's in the correct land and he seems to be saying the correct things. And as I say, I won't cast a direct judgment on what my personal feelings are for now until the live stream. However, I will look at what he has said, which is that the Feast of Trumpets of 2025 is when the rapture will take place, and I will use scripture to give an opinion, not my opinion, but the opinion of scripture, which is always the most important thing. So do check this video out for yourself, which is to give you the understanding of the things that have been said, and you can then draw your own conclusion. And as I said, the teaching that I did, the first one on the screen, are you ready for the second Exodus, or are you waiting for the pre-tribulation rapture? This goes into much comprehensive detail and breaks down the actual doctrine so you can understand it in full. Now, some of the reasons why what this person has said with regards to the rapture being in September 2025 are because of some of these things that we can see on screen, that a red heifer has been sacrificed in the political state that they call Israel. Now, some say that it was just a test run, but they do, however, have the ashes, which are real, from the burning and the sacrificial ordinance that they performed of that heifer. And so they are now saying that they have the ashes according to what you see in Numbers chapter 19. Read that for yourself to see the ritual that has to be performed. And so because this has now happened, even though it was classed as a test run, many people believe that that means that they are now able to do the second thing, which is to build the third temple. In addition to that, they also believe that many people in 2025 believe this is a Jubilee year, the 70th one since the first Exodus. Obviously, we know that 70 is a significant number, and so they are saying that because this is the 70th Jubilee since the first Exodus, it's only right that some type of Exodus stroke rapture will take place. And as I stay on that point, the interview of this gentleman, he says within the interview that he was told by Messiah himself about the rapture taking place on September the 23rd or 24th in 2025. And he was told by Messiah that it was a exodus. He didn't say rapture, he said it was an exodus. He said, but he interprets the word exodus to mean rapture. So I find it very interesting that he was given a particular prophecy in his words, but he somewhat changed the meaning of it. He called it a rapture rather than an exodus, which he says he was told. And so we know that the year, the 70th Jubilee, since the children of Yasharal left during the first Exodus, many people put those things together to say, well, then that means we should be expecting a second Exodus on this time. But as I say, according to him, he classes it as a rapture. So you'll have to watch the video for yourself to gain the full understanding. Then there are multiple calculations and biblical patterns that point to 2025. Multiple shadow types in scripture, various things. Some of them we won't have time to go into. Maybe on the live stream we'll be able to look at those in more detail. But for now, these are some of the things that are in the body of Messiah or in churchianity, Christianity, and even creeping into the awakening. And these things are pointing towards 2025. Then also secret talks over building a third temple, and that is in that political state they call Israel. So these talks have happened now that this red heifer has been sacrificed. There's talks, secret talks allegedly, that this is something that may take place, in addition to them looking at making it a two-state solution, something that's currently going on as discussion through the world leaders in this world. So there are lots of different points, and in addition, people having dreams and visions and prophecies, including the person on screen, indicating that 2025 is the year. So these are some of the reasons why this particular doctrine is believed and believed to be taking place this year in 2025. And so we need to get clarity from the one true source, which is obviously the word. That's the only place we can rely on, knowing it is infallible. And whilst people may be out there to deceive intentionally, there may also be people that are out there who are genuine, but they themselves are deceived. And because they're deceived, although they be genuine, they are now going to lead others into deception. And so we need to know that everything we need is in the word. And once we have that and we rightly divide and we let scripture interpret scripture, then we will not be deceived, because the Ruach HaKodesh will lead us into all truths. So there are a few scriptures I want to look at just to clear up this fact of this talk of a rapture in this year 2025. And incidentally, many people in the awakening don't actually believe in a rapture at all. And if you come from a religious background, I can understand why you wouldn't believe in it, because of the way how it is sold. But we have to understand that whilst the word rapture itself doesn't appear in the scriptures, the event that a rapture describes does appear in the scriptures, and the event that a rapture describes is biblical. And so we have to understand that if we get away from the actual word in itself, the events that take place is according to the scriptures when it comes to the rapture. It is the timing that we have to get correct, because you get the wrong timing, then you get the wrong doctrine. So let's not be put off when we heard the word rapture, because that's just a word. But the actual meaning of rapture, you could class it as a catching up of the saints, or Harpazo in the Greek. If we look at that as what it means, that is described in the scriptures. And that's something we're going to look at now. So let's start with the first main scripture where the rapture doctrine is formed. And we find that in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. I'll start from verse 50, where it says, "Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot enter the kingdom of Elohim, neither does corruption inherit incorruption. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. So here it is clearly telling us that in the moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, when the trumpet blows, that the dead, those who are dead, will be raised incorruptible. So the dead who are corruptible will be raised to incorruptible. In other words, they will be resurrected, and we, that means those who are alive, shall be changed. So the dead will raise incorruptible, resurrect, and those alive will be transformed. And that will be classed as a rapture, because this is something that is, according to the scriptures, classed as a mystery revealed to the apostle Shaul, and is corresponded in many other places which we will look at. So forget the terminology rapture. Think of the event, what it means. It is a scriptural event. The question is, when does it take place? And as I say, many people are saying this is something that is scheduled to happen in 2025. Now, the second group of scriptures which describe something very similar we find in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and I'll start at verse 15, where it says, "For this we say unto you by the word of Yah, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of Hamashiach shall not prevent them which are asleep." Verse 16, "For Messiah himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of Elohim, and the dead in Hamashiach shall rise first." Verse 17, "Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet Mashiach in the air, and so shall we ever be with Mashiach." And so again, this is emphasizing what we just read in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, but giving a bit more detail, telling us that those of us that are alive and remain to the coming of Messiah, we shall not prevent them which are asleep. In other words, those who have died will not be prevented by us from resurrecting. And then it tells us that Messiah himself will descend from heaven with the shout of the voice of an archangel. So it will be the archangel, namely the archangel Michael, with the trump of Elohim, and the dead in Messiah shall rise first. So the dead rise first, and then it says, and those of us who are alive will be caught up together with them in the clouds. So the dead rise first, in other words, the dead resurrect, and those who are alive will be caught up to join them in the air, in the clouds, to meet Messiah. And so shall we ever be with Messiah. So again, this is another set of scriptures written, I believe, by the same author, the Apostle Shaul, talking about this particular event. And so when we add these two together and we get a symmetry, we should have the understanding that the resurrection is before the rapture. I'm going to say that again. The resurrection of the dead is before the rapture. The resurrection of the dead takes place first, which is why it says in 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 16 that Messiah himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of Elohim, and the dead in Hamashiach shall rise first. So we have to understand that the dead rise first before those who are alive are caught up in the air. In other words, a resurrection is before the rapture. In other words, the rapture is after the resurrection. So you have to see the resurrection first before you can see the rapture. Very important for us to understand, and very simple for us to understand. The resurrection is before the rapture. So once we have the understanding, all we then have to do, if we want to identify where the rapture takes place on the timeline, is we have to just find the resurrection, because the resurrection has to come first before the rapture. So if we identify the resurrection, we therefore identify the rapture. And that is how we use the correct exegesis to understand what the word is telling us, by doing things in a chronological order, knowing that the resurrection goes together with the rapture, but the resurrection comes first. So if we find the resurrection, we find the rapture. And this is now what we will look at when we turn to Matthew chapter 24. Now we know in Matthew chapter 24, Messiah spends time talking to his disciples, answering their three questions, telling them when the temple will be destroyed, that the ones that they were looking at the time, telling him what will the sign of his coming be and what will the end be. He tells them all these things, and he goes through these things we find in Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13. And as he goes through this discussion of things that will happen, he gives all the signs and all the things that will happen in the end times. So we have that from Matthew chapter 3 all the way, Matthew chapter 24 verse 3 all the way down to the end of that chapter. But we're going to pick it up in 29. After he's expounded many, many things to them, we pick it up in verse 29, where he says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, I'll stop there. He says immediately after the tribulation of those days. So the things he's about to describe happen after the tribulation of those days. Obviously talking about the end days, talking about the end time tribulation, Daniel's 70th week, talking about the great tribulation, the tribulation, all of those as a whole. The things he is now about to describe takes place after the tribulation of those days. And he goes on to say, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Verse 31, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now we have just seen in 1 Thessalonians 4 that Messiah himself shall descend from heaven with a shout of the voice of the archangel, and the trump of Elohim, and the dead in Hamashiach will rise first. And now Messiah is describing the same event from his perspective, saying that then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth shall mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And the Son of Man shall send his angels with a great sound of the trumpet, what we just read in 1 Thessalonians 4, and they shall gather together the elect. Now, when Messiah is describing this event, saying gather together the elect, he hasn't mentioned a resurrection. But we know by matching up the two scriptures in 1 Thessalonians 4 and Matthew 24, he's talking of the same event, because this is when he appears and his angels gather the elect from the four winds of the earth. But we have already discovered that the resurrection must take place before the rapture. So though Messiah is not specifically talking about the details of the resurrection, he is talking about the overall event, where he says that the angels will gather the elect from the four winds of the earth, just as we saw that the dead in Messiah will rise first, and then those who are alive will be caught up to meet him. And of course, those who are alive in the end times will not be in one place. They will be scattered all across the four corners of the earth, the elect we are talking about. So the two events match, they are the same. And so what Messiah is talking about here is the catching up of the elect and the resurrection of the dead, though he doesn't specifically mention the resurrection of the dead. And he doesn't mention the resurrection of the dead because it is mentioned in many places prior to him making this statement. One of them we will look at in a moment in the book of Daniel. And so Messiah is giving an overview of the things that are happening in the end times. And he starts it off in verse 29 by saying immediately after the tribulation of those days. So all the things that he describes takes place after the tribulation of those days, which tells us that the tribulation has to come first before the catching up of the four elect from the four winds of the earth. That tribulation comes first, and then the gathering comes after the tribulation, the catching up of the saints. And so if we understand what is being said here, it should be easy to identify whether or not there is any truth in there being a rapture in this year 2025, because it has to happen after the tribulation of those days. And then Messiah gives the signs. Now, if we look at the signs that we can see, which are the sun being darkened, the moon not giving light, the stars falling from heaven, and the powers of heaven being shaken, he gives those signs. We then go to Revelation chapter 6 at the sixth seal, starting in verse 12, where it says, "And I beheld, and when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell unto earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind." And so, if we look at the description of those events in Revelation 6 and 12, we will see that they match perfectly with Matthew 24, verse 29 through to 31. Because it tells us that in Matthew 24:29, it says, "After the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened." Now, we've just read in Revelation that it said the sun became black as a sackcloth of hair. So the sun became darkened. There we have a match. And then it says, "And the moon shall not give her light." We see in Revelation 6 and 12, it says that the moon became as blood. So a blood red moon, meaning that the moon was darkened, therefore not giving its light. We therefore have another match. And then it says in Revelation 6 and 12 that the stars of heaven fell onto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she's shaken of a mighty wind. So the stars fall to earth. We go back to Matthew 24 and we see in verse 29 that it says, "And the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken." So we have a perfect match in terms of the signs Messiah is giving during those times to come. And therefore, the key verse is the first line of verse 29, where it says, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall all these signs take place." So the tribulations of those days Messiah is talking about in terms of the last days, the days that we're in now, these signs happen after the tribulation, not before, not during, after the tribulation. He says what he means, and he means what he says. So if the resurrection is before the rapture, all these signs given take place after the tribulation. I hope you catch what is being said here. The resurrection comes before the rapture, but the signs that are given to signify that the resurrection and rapture is about to take place happen immediately after the tribulation of those days. So it is very clear by the scriptures when the rapture, if we want to class it as that rather than a catching up, I'm not going to get hung up over the words, but the rapture takes place after the tribulation of those days. And also the resurrection, the raising of the dead, is before the rapture, because the dead in Hamashiach shall rise first. Then we which are alive shall be caught up together with them in the clouds. There is a chronology, there is an order, there is a sequential order that has to be followed. So with these understanding, it's very easy for us to see where the rapture and resurrection take place. And it is obviously easy for us to identify that they take place immediately after the tribulation of those days. So we have seen Messiah himself mention these things about the signs to be looking out for. And as I mentioned earlier, in that particular discourse, he didn't refer directly to the dead awakening at that particular point. He did mention it other times during the course of his ministry, but talking about that breakdown in Matthew 24, he doesn't directly mention the dead. But we can see that the catching up or the gathering or the saints that are the elect that are gathered from the four winds of the earth from one heaven end of heaven to another, we can see that those things are taking place at a particular time, a time that he is describing that happens immediately after the tribulation of those days. So we also know that because the resurrection of the dead has to happen first, that obviously has taken place. Now, when we go to the book of Daniel, chapter 12, we see another event described, which we can then match to the two events we have just seen, and they are all the same. Where it says in verse 1, and at that time shall Michael, this is the archangel Michael, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. And verse 2 says, and many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. So in Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, he tells us that many of those that sleep in the dust of the earth, in other words, many of those that are dead, shall awake, in other words, shall resurrect, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And so, if it is talking about a resurrection here, we know that the resurrection must take place first, and then those who are alive are caught up. And so, of course, this means that we have identified the resurrection, that the resurrection happens in the last days, at the last hour, and those who are asleep will awake to everlasting life, some of them, and some to shame and everlasting contempt, which is obviously when the judgment is being made, the final judgment. So we have perfect scriptures aligning, showing us these resurrections, or this resurrection taking place, and we know that the resurrection must happen first, and then those who are alive are caught up. And so this scripture again verifies that the resurrection takes place at the end, and the resurrection comes before the rapture, so therefore the rapture takes place at the end too. It's very logical and easy to understand. And when we know that Michael the archangel is the one who is signifying that trump when the dead in Meshach rise first, he is the one that stands up for the children of his people, i.e. Daniel's people, those from Yasharal. When we know that he is the angel that the Most High has appointed in the times of the end to perform these things with Messiah, when Messiah comes back for his people, we also will see that Michael is very significant in identifying what takes place when we go to Revelation chapter 20. Now, bear in mind, Revelation has 22 books, and the 20th book we are about to read is obviously towards the end of the whole book. So, therefore, we know that this is something that's happening at the end. Let's pick it up in verse 1 where it says, and I saw an angel come down from heaven, talking of this same archangel Michael, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand, and he laid hold of that dragon, the old serpent, which is the devil and Hasatan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And verse 3 says, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosened a little season. Verse 4, and I saw thrones, and they that sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them, and I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Yahushua and the word of Yah, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Messiah 1,000 years. And verse 5 says, but the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Revelation 20, 1 through to 5. It says that this is the first resurrection. So if this is the first resurrection, bearing in mind all we've just read, that Hasatan is bound into the bottomless pit, and a seal is put upon him, and the thrones are then sins, and judgment is given to them, and the souls which were beheaded for the witness of Messiah and the word of Elohim, those that had not worshipped the beast, we see that those were resurrected, and they lived and reigned with Messiah for 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead did not live until after the 1,000 years. So this event we have seen is showing us that those who died, who were martyred, are resurrected. And we already have seen that the resurrection has to come before the rapture. And this is classed as the first resurrection, which is right at this end point. So if all of those things be true, according to the scriptures, then the rapture cannot take place until after the first resurrection, because the dead in Hamashiach will rise first, as we've seen a couple of times already in the scriptures. So if the first resurrection is here, then that means the rapture has to take place here also, or after this event. It can't take place before, because then it is not in chronological order in accordance to the timeline. And so once we put these things together, line upon line, precept upon precept, here a little, there a little, we can see that there is going to be a catching up of saints into the air to meet Messiah, according to the scripture, that there is going to be a resurrection of the dead, which we have seen in multiple scriptures, and that is going to be classed as the first resurrection. And it is at the first resurrection, when the dead in Hamashiach rise first, that those who are then alive are caught up in the air. So you cannot have a rapture until you have the first resurrection. And the first resurrection is at the end, after the tribulation of those days, as we can see here and by the scriptures already covered. So it is quite easy to work out that unless we see a resurrection of the dead first, and unless the tribulation of those days has already happened, we can't see a rapture, because it does not fit into the exegesis of proper scripture. It just doesn't work. So if there is confusion about a rapture taking place in 2025 without having these sequence of events, there shouldn't be, because it is very clear, according to the scriptures, that though there is what you can class as a rapture to take place, it doesn't take place until the end of all the things described, and not in the next 6 weeks or so, as some people have put it down to be. So you have to draw your own conclusions as to where those are getting this information from. So there will be no rapture before the following. In other words, the rapture will not take place until the first resurrection. The first resurrection will not take place till immediately after the tribulation of those days. And before those things happen, you have to have the following events take place before you can see a rapture. And these are the events that are on the horizon before we get to the point of the first resurrection. And when we look at these events that you see on screen, we have not seen any of them in their entirety, in their fullest form, being fulfilled. So how can there be a rapture immediately after the tribulation of those days happening in the next 6 weeks? It is not possible. These events have to take place first. The two witnesses, the pestilence in darkness found in Psalm 91 and also in Amos chapter 8, the rider on the white horse, the rider on the red horse, and all the other horses, the black horse and the pale horse, but just sticking to two of the horses. These have to take place first. The mark of the beast, which you've seen in Revelation 13, the strong delusion, 2 Thessalonians 2 and 11, and men's heart failing from fear, Luke 21:26. And so these are the events that have to take place first. Now, if Yah is willing, we will have a live stream at the end of the month or going into the next month, and we will talk about some of these things as discussion points. So in order to keep this video fairly brief, I'm not going to cover them here. I'm just giving them to you now for food for thought. But these are all the events that have to take place first before we see what is described as the signs of the end, and then the gathering of the elect from the four winds of the earth, the resurrection of the dead, the rapture, etc., etc. These things have to take place first. So, though we should not be looking for a rapture as is described in religions and in churchianity and Christianity, though we should not be looking for that, but are these events the events on the horizon that we should be looking out for? Are these the things that many people have misunderstood and misprophesied, thinking that it's one thing because of bad doctrine and because of eisegesis rather than exegesis? Are these the things that we should be looking out for according to the word and according to the chronological order of events? This is what I want to leave you with to meditate and to understand. And as I say, if you are be willing, we'll get together collectively and discuss these things so we can have a better understanding and be prepared for those things that are to come, not prepared for the things that are not about to happen because their time has not yet come. So I just wanted to cover these points to give you the correct understanding according to doctrine and according to rightly dividing the word of truth, so you can understand it shouldn't be causing us confusion. But I know that many of these things about this rapture and so on and so forth have gone viral, and sometimes these things can cause people to err and can cause confusion, especially those who are new to the faith or still trying to understand things or trying to come out of the pitfalls of the religious mindset, which is the doctrines of men. So that is the end of the teaching. I hope you have now got some understanding about correct doctrine and the order that events take place according to the scriptures. We really need to be on our P's and Q's in these end times and be very alert to not be deceived by the many pitfalls that are out there when it comes to religions and the doctrines of men. If we understand the words of the Most High, we will always be able to rightly divide, with the Ruach HaKodesh working with us or being in us, leading us to understanding and leading us to having the tools the Most High has given us. As I said, Yah willing, we will have a live stream where we'll discuss some of these things in more detail for further understanding and to prepare ourselves for the things that are ahead, very vastly approaching. But until then, let's stay prayed up and make sure that we are rightly dividing the word and not following the doctrines of men. So I'll leave it here to all those that are his. May the Most High bless you and keep you.